The air in the emergency room at Metropolitan General was a toxic soup. It smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of blood. Sounds crashed into each other without rhythm. The frantic beeping of a heart monitor, the squeal of gurney wheels on linoleum, a child's terrified wail, and the clipped, impersonal voices over the intercom. It was an orchestra of human misery, and Nurse Alara Vance was its most invisible musician. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her job, it seemed, was to be small. Alara's world had shrunk to the size of a supply closet. She restocked saline drips and gauze pads. She changed bedding. She mopped up spills that no one else wanted to touch. She was a body, a pair of hands for the tasks deemed too menial for the real nurses, the ones who moved with confidence and purpose. Her uniform, always a size too large, seemed to hang off her frame, swallowing her whole. The long sleeves were a constant, a necessary shield even in the sweltering heat of the trauma bay. They hid the jagged, silvery scar that snaked up her left forearm, a permanent reminder of a life she had buried 6 feet under. Her colleagues saw her as slow, timid, perhaps even incompetent. They called her Mouse when they thought she could not hear. Whispers followed her down the hall like a trail of breadcrumbs meant to lead her further into obscurity. Did you see her drop that vial? She takes 20 minutes to make a bed. I don't know how she even passed her boards. Alara heard it all. She absorbed the cuts, the dismissive glances, the sighs of exasperation. She absorbed them and said nothing. Apologies were her only currency. I'm sorry. My mistake. I'll be faster. Presiding over this kingdom of pain and ego was Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief of emergency medicine. He was a man carved from sharp angles and cold ambition. His surgical skill was legendary, his diagnostic acumen undeniable. But his brilliance was matched only by his cruelty. He moved through his ER like a predator, his voice a scalpel that could dissect a person's confidence with a single, barbed comment. He was handsome in a severe, cinematic way, with silver hair at his temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He came from old money and wore his privilege like a tailored suit. Dr. Finch had a special kind of contempt for Alara. She was an affront to his sense of order and excellence. Her quiet, fumbling presence was a stain on the pristine machine he believed he was running. He never missed an opportunity to make an example of her. He seemed to draw energy from her humiliation, his own stature growing in his mind each time he made her shrink. The day it all shattered began like any other. A lull had settled over the ER, a rare moment of quiet. Dr. Finch was holding court at the Central Nurses Station, regaling a few sycophantic junior doctors and nurses with a story about a yachting trip in the Mediterranean. They hung on his every word, their laughter a little too loud, a little too eager. Alara was nearby, tasked with preparing a suture tray for a minor procedure. Her hands, as they often did under the weight of observation, felt clumsy and foreign. She picked up the sterilized tray. It was stainless steel, heavy and slick. As she turned, her elbow brushed against a chart someone had left hanging off the edge of the counter. The slight nudge was all it took. The tray tilted. For a horrifying slow-motion second, she tried to correct it, her fingers scrambling for purchase. But it was no use. Clang. Crash. The tray hit the floor, scattering sterile scalpels, forceps, and needle drivers across the polished white tiles. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Every head snapped toward her. The laughter at the nurses' station died instantly. Dr. Finch's story was forgotten. All eyes were on Alara, standing frozen over the glittering mess. A deep, furious silence descended. Alara's face burned with a heat that felt like it could melt her skin. I'm so sorry, she whispered, the words getting caught in her throat. She immediately bent down, her hands shaking as she began to pick up the scattered instruments, contaminating them further. Dr. Finch moved with the explosive speed of a viper. He was in front of her in 3 long strides. He did not yell. He did not have to. His voice was a low, venomous hiss that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. "Leave it," he commanded. Alara froze, her fingers hovering over a pair of forceps. "I said, leave it," he repeated, his voice dropping even lower. "Look at me, Nurse Vance." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. His eyes were boring into her, filled with a cold, intellectual rage. He saw her not as a person, but as a malfunctioning piece of equipment. "Do you have any idea how much that tray costs? The time to sterilize it? The delay you've just caused?" He gestured vaguely at the empty trauma bay. "What if we had a critical patient right now? What if someone's life depended on that equipment? On you not being a clumsy, butter-fingered liability?" The other staff members watched, a captive audience. Some looked away, feigning interest in a chart. Others watched with a kind of grim fascination. Maya, a young nurse who had sometimes offered Alara a kind word, stared at her shoes, her expression pained. Nurse Helen, a veteran of the ER for 20 years, simply crossed her arms and watched, her face a mask of neutrality. "I'm sorry, doctor," Alara mumbled, her gaze falling back to the floor. "Sorry doesn't recalibrate a $20,000 laser, and it certainly doesn't uncontaminate my instruments," he sneered. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to lean back. "I have run surgical teams on 3 continents. I have worked with the best, and somehow I have ended up with you. You are, without a doubt, the most incompetent, useless excuse for a nurse I have ever had the misfortune of encountering." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of expensive mouthwash and disdain. "You are a hazard, a walking malpractice suit. Now get out of my sight. Go clean the toilets. It seems to be the only thing you're qualified for." He turned his back on her, dismissing her as he would a piece of trash. The sycophants around him let out nervous chuckles, the tension breaking. Dr. Finch picked up his story where he had left off, as if nothing had happened. Alara was left on her knees, surrounded by the evidence of her failure. She gathered the instruments with trembling hands, her face a mask of shame. But beneath the shame, a different emotion flickered, a tiny, cold ember of righteous anger. It was an old, familiar feeling, one she had worked very hard to forget. She pushed it down, deep down, and retreated to the shadows where she belonged. The universe, however, had other plans. Not an hour later, the world outside the hospital's hermetically sealed doors tore itself apart. A torrential downpour had turned the interstate into a slick ribbon of death. A tanker truck jackknifed, and the resulting pileup involved more than a dozen vehicles. The call came in, and the ER exploded into controlled chaos. The lull was shattered, replaced by the shriek of sirens. Gurneys began to flood the entrance, a grim parade of the broken and bleeding. Every doctor, every nurse was in motion. Commands were shouted, vitals were called out. The air crackled with urgency. In this maelstrom, Alara was a small, quiet eddy, handing out supplies, clearing paths, doing her best to stay out of the way. Dr. Finch was in his element. He moved through the trauma bays like a conductor, pointing, directing, making life-or-death decisions in seconds. "Bay 1, tension pneumo, get me a chest tube. Bay 3 has a cranial bleed. Page neuro, get that child's C-spine immobilized." He was brilliant, a master of the storm. Amid the flood of patients, one gurney was wheeled in and left near the hallway, almost an afterthought. The man on it was unconscious, his face caked with mud and blood. He wore torn, dirty clothes, and the paramedics had simply labeled him John Doe. They'd found him on the periphery of the main crash site, thrown clear of a wrecked pickup truck. Dr. Finch, moving between 2 critical patients, gave the John Doe a cursory glance. He saw the tattered jeans, the grime, the faint smell of cheap liquor the rain hadn't washed away. He made a snap judgment, colored by 1,000 similar cases. "Another drunk driver," he announced to no one in particular. He pulled back one of the man's eyelids with his thumb, shone a penlight into it for a fraction of a second. "Pupils are a bit sluggish. Probably a minor concussion on top of the alcohol. No obvious signs of major trauma. Shunt him to the observation ward. He can sleep it off. We need this bay for actual victims." The order was given. A busy orderly nodded. "I'll get to him when I can, Doc. We're swamped." Alara was nearby, replacing an empty IV bag. She heard the diagnosis. She saw the dismissal. Her assigned task was to help clear the less critical patients to make room. That included the John Doe. "Nurse Vance," the charge nurse called out. "Take the drunk in hallway 4 to the observation ward. Now." "Yes, nurse," Alara replied, her voice barely a whisper. She pushed the gurney out of the chaotic thoroughfare and into a slightly quieter corridor. The man lay unnervingly still. He wasn't moaning or restless like most intoxicated head injury patients. He was simply silent. Too silent. As she began to wheel him toward the elevators, she adjusted the thin blanket that had been thrown over him. Her fingers brushed against his neck. She felt it then. A small, almost imperceptible bump. Her brow furrowed. She stopped the gurney under a fluorescent light and leaned in closer, her professional curiosity momentarily overriding her ingrained timidity. There, just below his jawline, partially hidden by the grime, was a tiny, angry red dot. It was not a cut or a scrape. It was a puncture mark. A perfect, clean circle, like one made by a hypodermic needle. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thud against her ribs. Her training, buried under years of self-imposed exile, surged to the surface. The meek, fumbling nurse receded, and something else, something sharp and analytical, took her place. Her hands became steady, her eyes focused. She lifted one of his eyelids herself. The pupil was blown, wide and unresponsive. She checked the other. It was constricted to a pinpoint. Asymmetrical pupils. Not from a concussion. Not like this. She put her ear close to his mouth. His breathing was dangerously shallow, each inhalation a faint, fluttering whisper. She placed 2 fingers on his wrist. His pulse was thready and erratic, a frantic drumbeat racing towards silence. These were not the signs of alcohol intoxication. This was not a concussion. This was a specific toxidrome, a clinical presentation she had not seen since the dust and chaos of Kandahar. She knew what it was. She knew the chemical signature as if it were tattooed on the inside of her eyelids. It was a fast-acting, organophosphate-based nerve agent, modified for rapid incapacitation. The kind that didn't show up on a standard hospital tox screen. The kind that killed in under an hour. And by her calculation, this man had about 10 minutes left. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat. She shoved it down. There was no time. She abandoned the gurney and ran, her feet slapping against the linoleum. She found Dr. Finch standing over a patient, barking orders. "Dr. Finch!" she said, her voice louder than she intended. He turned, his face a mask of irritation. "What is it, Vance? Can't you see I'm busy?" "The John Doe," she gasped, out of breath. "The one in the hallway. It's not alcohol. He's been poisoned. A nerve agent, I think. His vitals are crashing." Finch stared at her as if she had just started speaking in tongues. A look of utter disbelief, followed by a flash of pure fury, crossed his face. "A nerve agent? Have you lost your mind? He's a drunk from a car wreck. I made the diagnosis myself." "You're wrong," Alara insisted, the words tumbling out. "His pupils are asymmetrical. His respiration is failing. There's a puncture mark on his neck. He needs atropine and pralidoxime, a massive dose, right now, or he's going to die." For a moment, the entire trauma bay seemed to listen. Finch's handsome face hardened into a granite mask of rage. He took a step toward her, his voice dropping to that familiar, deadly whisper. "Are you questioning my diagnosis? You? A glorified janitor who can't even carry a tray without dropping it." He jabbed a finger in her face. "You are a nurse. You follow orders. You do not make diagnoses. And you certainly do not contradict me in my own ER. Now, I gave you an order. Move the patient to the observation ward. Am I clear?" Alara looked into his cold, unyielding eyes. She saw the wall of his ego, impenetrable and absolute. He would not listen. He would let that man die before he admitted he, the great Dr. Finch, could have possibly made a mistake, especially one pointed out by her. In that instant, a choice was made. A lifetime of hiding, of being small and silent, went up in flames. The cold ember of anger she had suppressed earlier roared into a bonfire. She did not say another word. She simply turned and walked away from him. She did not walk back to the gurney. She walked, with purpose, to the nearest crash cart. Her movements were fluid, economical. She pulled open the drawers, her hands flying over the vials of medication. She drew up 2 separate syringes, her calculations precise, her knowledge of dosage and potentiation instinctual. She grabbed an ambu bag and a laryngoscope. Then she ran back to the man in the hallway. He was fading. His skin had a bluish tint. She didn't hesitate. She pushed the gurney not toward the observation ward, but toward an empty supply closet at the end of a deserted corridor. She shoved it inside, closed the door, and flipped the lock. Darkness. The only light was the thin sliver under the door. Her hands worked with a certainty that felt alien and yet deeply familiar. She uncapped the first syringe. She found the man's IV line, which the paramedics had started, and no one had bothered to hook up to anything. She injected the first drug, a massive dose of atropine, directly into the port. Then the second, the pralidoxime chloride, the nerve agent antidote. It was a combination in dosage that was not in any civilian textbook. It was battlefield medicine. The man's body arched in a violent seizure as the drugs hit his system. His heart monitor, which she had quickly attached, screamed a flatline tone. Cardiac arrest. "No, you don't," she growled, the words torn from her throat. She ripped open his shirt. There was no time for paddles. She balled her hand into a fist and delivered a sharp, perfectly placed precordial thump to his sternum. Once. Twice. The monitor blipped. A rhythm returned, weak but present. His breathing was still non-existent. She tilted his head back, inserted the laryngoscope with an expert's touch, visualized the vocal cords, and fed the endotracheal tube into his airway. She attached the ambu bag and began to breathe for him, one steady squeeze every 5 seconds. She was no longer Alara Vance, the mousy nurse. She was a combat flight nurse again, 10,000 feet over hostile territory, with nothing but her training and her will between a soldier and death. Meanwhile, Dr. Finch had finished with his critical patient. A thought niggled at him. The audacity of that woman, Vance. He looked toward the hallway. The gurney was gone. He assumed his order had finally been followed. But then the charge nurse approached him, her face tight with worry. "Doctor, have you seen the John Doe from hallway 4? Or Nurse Vance? Neither is in the observation ward." A cold suspicion dawned on Finch. He strode down the hall, his eyes scanning every room. He saw the locked supply closet. He rattled the handle. "Vance, open this door!" There was no response, only the faint, rhythmic sound of the ambu bag. "Security!" Finch bellowed, his voice echoing in the corridor. "Get this door open, now!" 2 burly security guards arrived. A minute later, the lock splintered and the door flew open. The light flooded the tiny space, revealing the scene inside. Alara, kneeling on the floor, breathing for the patient, surrounded by discarded syringes and medical packaging. The man on the gurney was still, but the bluish tint to his skin was gone. A steady, if slow, pulse beat on the monitor. Dr. Finch's face was a study in apoplectic rage. He saw a rogue nurse, a trashed closet, and a flagrant act of insubordination. He did not see a life that had been saved. "What have you done?" he screamed, his voice shaking. "You are practicing medicine without a license. You stole drugs. You disobeyed a direct order." Alara didn't even look at him. Her focus was absolute. "He needs a ventilator and a continuous atropine drip, or he'll arrest again," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of its usual tremor. This clinical detachment, this utter lack of fear, seemed to enrage Finch even more. "You're fired!" he shouted, his face purple. "You are fired! Security, get her out of here! Get this unstable woman out of my hospital! Confiscate her badge! Escort her off the premises immediately!" The guards hesitated, looking from the furious doctor to the calm nurse and the patient who was clearly still alive. "Now!" Finch roared. One of the guards reluctantly took Alara's arm. She did not resist. She stood up, gave the ambu bag a final squeeze, and looked at the other guard. "Keep breathing for him. 1 breath every 5 seconds. Don't stop." They pulled her from the closet. Finch personally ripped her ID badge from her scrubs, the plastic snapping. "You will never work in this city again. I'll make sure of it," he spat. Alara said nothing. She let them lead her past the stunned faces of her former colleagues. She saw Maya, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. She saw Nurse Helen, whose neutral mask had finally cracked, revealing a flicker of shock. She was marched through the ER, out the main entrance, and deposited onto the rain-slicked pavement without her coat, her bag, or her dignity. The automatic doors slid shut behind her, sealing her out of the world that had, for a brief, terrifying moment, felt like her own again. The cold rain began to soak through her thin scrubs as she started the long, lonely walk home. 2 hours passed. Inside the hospital, Dr. Finch was trying to manage the fallout. He had moved the John Doe to the ICU, placing him on a ventilator as the strange nurse had suggested, more to cover his bases than anything else. He spun a story for the staff about an unstable nurse having a psychotic break, how he had narrowly saved the patient from her incompetence. He was crafting the narrative, cementing his position as the hero who had averted disaster. Then the sky broke. It was not the sound of thunder. It was a deep, rhythmic chopping, a sound that vibrated in the chest and rattled the windows of the hospital. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It grew louder, closer, until it was directly overhead. People rushed to the windows. On the 6-lane interstate outside, which police had just reopened, traffic screeched to a halt. 2 sleek black helicopters, unmarked save for a single stark emblem, descended from the gray sky. They did not circle or wait for clearance. They landed directly on the highway, their rotor wash blasting cars with wind and rain. Ramps dropped before the skids even fully settled. Teams of soldiers, clad in black tactical gear and carrying advanced rifles, poured out. They moved with a terrifying, unified purpose, securing the perimeter and forming a cordon around the main entrance of Metropolitan General. They did not look like National Guard. They looked like something else entirely, something harder and more dangerous. The hospital's security chief ran out, waving his arms frantically. "You can't land here! This is a civilian zone!" The lead soldier, a mountain of a man with a face like carved granite, didn't even break stride. He simply held up a hand, and his team flowed past him into the ER lobby, their weapons held at a low, professional ready. Panic erupted. Patients screamed. Staff ducked behind counters. Through the parted sea of soldiers, a man strode in. He was older, in his late 50s, with graying hair cut severely short. He wore a decorated military uniform that was immaculately pressed, his chest a rainbow of distinguished service ribbons. A silver star glinted on his shoulder. This was General Marcus Thorne, and he radiated an authority that made Dr. Finch's seem like a child's tantrum. Finch, drawn by the commotion, hurried to the lobby, his face flushed with indignation. "What is the meaning of this? I am the chief of this department. Who is in charge here?" General Thorne's cold blue eyes swept the room, dismissing the chaos, dismissing the armed guards, dismissing Finch. His gaze was searching. "We're looking for a patient." Thorne's voice was calm, but it cut through the noise like a diamond drill. "John Doe, admitted approximately 2 hours ago from a vehicle accident." Finch puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "The patient is in my ICU. He is stable. I am his attending physician. Now remove your men from my hospital before I—" Thorne cut him off with a flick of his wrist. "We had a trace on our asset. He was injected with a proprietary nerve agent, VX Delta. Our telemetry showed him flatline 18 minutes after arrival. Then, 12 minutes later, his vitals stabilized. Someone administered a full-spectrum organophosphate countermeasure, a non-standard dose, something not even our own field medics carry anymore. We are not here for the patient, doctor. We are here for the person who saved him." He turned to one of his aides. "What was the call sign Langley gave her?" "Angel, sir," the aide replied. "They called her the Angel of Kandahar." Thorne's eyes narrowed as he scanned the terrified faces of the nurses. "We are looking for an angel. Who was it?" No one spoke. Finch's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. A nerve agent, a non-standard dose, the ravings of the fired nurse, Alara Vance. A cold dread, colder than any he had ever known, began to seep into his bones. "No one?" Thorne asked, his patience wearing thin. "My man is dying upstairs, and the only person on this continent who knows how to stop it is in this building. Find her." His soldiers began to move, their methods more insistent now. Just then, Maya, the young nurse, stepped forward, her body trembling. She's not here," she stammered. Thorne's gaze snapped to her. "What do you mean she's not here? Who are you talking about?" "Nurse Alara Vance," Maya whispered. "She's the one who said he was poisoned. Dr. Finch, he fired her. He had security throw her out." An absolute chilling silence fell over the lobby. Every eye turned to Dr. Finch. General Thorne slowly turned his head, his expression unreadable, but radiating a pressure that was almost physical. "You did what?" Finch's face had gone pale, the color of ash. "She was unstable, insubordinate. I had no idea." Thorne ignored his sputtering excuses. He turned to his lead commando. "Find her. Her name is Alara Vance. Use every resource we have. I want her found 10 minutes ago." He then fixed his glacial stare back on Finch. "You, Doctor, will take me to my captain, and you will pray. You will pray that we are not too late." Alara was miles away, walking aimlessly through the deluge. The rain had plastered her hair to her scalp and soaked her scrubs to the point they felt like a second icy skin. She was numb. The anger had burned out, leaving behind only the hollow ache of defeat. She had broken her one rule: stay hidden. And the consequences had been immediate and absolute. She was jobless, disgraced, and utterly alone. A pair of headlights cut through the gray sheet of rain, blinding her. A black, government-style SUV screeched to a halt beside her, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. She flinched, expecting a splash of water, and kept walking. The back window glided down. "Alara Vance," a voice called out, calm and authoritative. She stopped, turning slowly. Inside the vehicle sat the uniformed general, his face grim in the dim interior light. He looked exactly as he had in her memories, just older. The man who had pinned a medal on her chest in a dusty tent halfway around the world. The man she had run from. "We've been looking for you, flight nurse," General Thorne said, his voice softer now. "Get in. Captain Vance needs you." The world tilted on its axis. Captain Vance. Not John Doe. She stared, her mind struggling to process the impossible coincidence. The man on the gurney. The man she had saved. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "There's no time, Alara," Thorne said gently. "Please, get in the car." The door opened. She moved as if in a dream, sliding into the warm, dry interior of the SUV. A soldier immediately wrapped a thick, fleece-lined military jacket around her shivering shoulders. It smelled of ozone and wool. The door closed, shutting out the storm, and the vehicle accelerated smoothly, performing a flawless U-turn and speeding back toward the hospital. "Cole Vance," she finally managed to say, her voice hoarse. "He's alive?" "Because of you," Thorne confirmed. "You administered the primary counteragent. No one else would have known how. But it only bought him time. The toxin has a secondary stage. It's designed to bypass the initial treatment and trigger a full systemic collapse. We have about an hour to synthesize the biphasic inhibitor, and you're the only one who knows the formula." Alara closed her eyes, the tactical and medical knowledge flooding back, pushing aside the meek nurse persona for good. The formula. She saw it in her mind. A complex chain of compounds she had helped develop in a DARPA lab years ago. A formula that was highly classified. The SUV arrived back at the hospital with a police escort. The scene in the ER was a tableau of frozen shock. Thorne led the way, with Alara, now wrapped in his command jacket, walking beside him. Two of his commandos flanked them. They strode past the nurse's station, past the bewildered doctors, their boots making no sound on the floor. They reached the ICU. Dr. Finch was standing outside the glass-walled room where Captain Vance lay, hooked up to a dozen machines. Finch saw Alara and his face contorted in a mixture of fear and disbelief. What is she doing here?" he stammered, looking at Thorne. Thorne didn't spare him a glance. He stopped in front of the room and looked at Alara. "What do you need?" Alara's eyes scanned the monitors, absorbing the data. Heart rate, blood oxygen, intracranial pressure. It was all wrong. He was crashing again. "I need the pharmacy. Unrestricted access. I need mannitol, hypertonic saline, and 3 grams of magnesium sulfate. Now. And get me a full blood gas panel and a toxicology screen. But tell the lab to look for acetylcholinesterase inhibition." Her voice was crisp, clear, and filled with an authority that stunned everyone who had known her as Mouse. Finch stepped forward, trying to regain a shred of his power. "I am the attending physician here. All orders must go through." Thorne finally turned to face him. His movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly menacing. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Your authority in all matters concerning Captain Vance is hereby and permanently revoked. From this moment on, you will address Nurse Vance as ma'am. You will provide her with any equipment, any personnel, and any medication she requests, without question and without delay. Her orders are my orders. If he dies because you hesitated for 1 second, I will personally charge you with the negligent homicide of a United States military officer. Is that clear? Dr. Finch's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Alara, at the woman he had humiliated and fired just hours before, now standing there as the most powerful person in the room. He gave a short, jerky nod. I didn't hear you, Doctor, Thorne pressed. Yes, Finch choked out. Yes, crystal clear. Good, Thorne said. He turned back to Alara. The hospital is yours, ma'am. Save my soldier. Alara nodded, her focus already elsewhere. She was in the zone, the world narrowing to the patient, the data, and the ticking clock. She walked past the shell-shocked Dr. Finch and into the ICU room, the timid nurse left behind for dead in the rain. The Angel of Kandahar was back on duty. Inside the ICU, Alara worked with a focused intensity that was breathtaking to watch. She didn't just give orders, she moved, her hands a blur of efficiency. She adjusted ventilator settings, titrated drips, and drew blood herself, her technique flawless. The ICU nurses, who had once mocked her, now scrambled to keep up, their faces a mixture of confusion and newfound respect. Maya was her shadow, anticipating her needs, handing her equipment before she even asked. In a secured conference room down the hall, General Thorne was debriefing Alara during a rare 2-minute lull. Cole was deep undercover, he explained, his voice low. He was tracking a shipment of this new agent. It was developed by a rogue state and is being sold on the black market. It's designed to mimic a stroke or a heart attack, to be untraceable. He was compromised. The intel he was carrying is in his head. If we lose him, we lose the only lead we have to stop this stuff from hitting the streets of a major American city. The stakes were higher than she could have imagined. It wasn't just one man's life. It was thousands. Meanwhile, in his office, Dr. Alistair Finch was falling apart. His career, his reputation, his entire world was crumbling. Humiliation burned in his gut, hotter and more acidic than any shame he had ever felt. It wasn't just that he had been wrong. It was that he had been proven wrong by her, the mousy, incompetent little nurse. He couldn't bear it. His narcissism couldn't process the reality. It had to be someone else's fault. It had to be her fault. His mind, twisted by rage and self-preservation, made a dark and treacherous leap. He thought about the men he owed money to, dangerous men with long memories and short tempers, a gambling debt that had spiraled out of control. They had been pressuring him, threatening him. They had told him they might one day call on him for a favor at the hospital, a way to clear his slate. With trembling hands, he picked up his personal cell phone and dialed a number from a burner SIM card he kept hidden in his desk. The voice on the other end was gravelly and impatient. What? It's me, Finch whispered, his throat dry. You said if I ever had something you might be interested in. I'm listening, the voice grunted. There's a patient here, Finch said, the words feeling like poison on his tongue. He's military, high value. They've locked the place down. But there's a woman, a nurse. She's the only one who seems to know how to treat him. They're calling her his guardian angel or something. If you wanted to get to him, you'd have to go through her. He gave them the name, Alara Vance, and Captain Cole Vance's room number. Interesting, the voice said. Your debt is cleared. Now burn this number and forget you ever called. The line went dead. Finch slumped in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. He had done it. He had crossed the line from which there was no return. He told himself it was to save himself, but deep down, in a dark corner of his soul, he knew the truth. He wanted Alara to fail. He wanted the patient to die, because only then could his own catastrophic failure be buried forever. Back in the ICU, Alara's senses were on high alert. Years spent in combat zones had honed her instincts into a razor's edge. She felt a wrongness in the air, a subtle shift in the hospital's rhythm. The quiet confidence she had felt moments before was replaced by a familiar, prickling unease. It was the feeling she used to get just before an IED went off, or before sniper fire rained down on the medevac chopper. She noticed two men in maintenance uniforms mopping a section of the ICU hallway that was already spotless. They moved too slowly, their eyes scanning the room layouts, not the floor. Their uniforms were clean, too clean for maintenance workers in the middle of a crisis. One of them had a slight bulge under his jacket, right where a shoulder holster would sit. Her heart rate kicked up, but her expression remained calm. She turned to Maya. "I need a sterile drape to cover the monitors. The light is causing a glare." It was a lie, but Maya nodded and hurried to get one. As Maya left, Alara moved to the side of Captain Vance's bed. She quietly unhooked one of the heavy metal 1V poles. It was solid steel, about 4 feet long. She propped it against the wall just inside the door, hidden from the hallway. She then took a spare saline bag and, using a strip of medical tape, secured it to the top of the door, positioning it so it would fall if the door was opened with any force. A simple, improvised alarm. She dimmed the lights in the room, citing patient comfort. She stood in the shadows, her body angled away from the door, watching the reflection of the hallway in the dark glass of a medical supply cabinet. Waiting. The two maintenance workers finished their mopping and separated. One stayed in the hall, a lookout. The other approached Captain Vance's room. He glanced both ways, then swiped a stolen keycard. The lock beeped. He pushed the door open quietly. The saline bag dropped, hitting the floor with a soft but distinct thump. It was all the warning Alara needed. The man slipped inside, a silenced pistol in his hand. He saw the figure on the bed. He raised his weapon. In that split second, Alara moved. She was not a nurse. She was a blur of contained violence. She grabbed the steel IV pole. In one fluid motion, she swung it like a baseball bat, connecting with the assassin's wrist. Crack! The sound of bone snapping was sickeningly loud in the quiet room. The gun clattered to the floor. The man screamed, a high, strangled sound. Before he could recover, Alara reversed her grip on the pole and drove the base of it hard into his solar plexus. The air rushed out of him in a whoosh. He crumpled to his knees, gasping. She kicked the gun far under the bed, then delivered a sharp, disabling blow to the side of his neck with the edge of her hand. He collapsed, unconscious. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. The lookout in the hall heard the scream and started to draw his own weapon, but he was too late. Two of Thorne's commandos, who had been posing as hospital visitors, materialized out of the waiting area chairs. They descended on him, disarming and subduing him with brutal, silent efficiency. General Thorne burst into the room, his own sidearm drawn. He saw the unconscious assassin on the floor, Alara standing over him with the IV pole in her hand, her breathing steady, her eyes hard as diamonds. Captain Vance was untouched. Thorne stared at her, then at the man on the floor, then back at her. A slow, deep respect dawned in his eyes. He had known she was a good medic. He hadn't realized she was a warrior. "The hospital is compromised," Alara stated, her voice flat. "They know he's here. They know who I am. We can't stay." Thorne nodded grimly. "I agree. We have to move him." He keyed his radio. "Raptor is compromised. I repeat, the nest is compromised. Initiate emergency extraction protocol. Now." He looked at Alara. "We have a secure location, but it's remote. A cabin in the mountains. It's rustic." "Does it have electricity?" Alara asked. "Yes." "Then we can make it work," she said. "But we need to move fast. The secondary stage of the toxin. It's starting. His fever is spiking. We're out of time." The escape was on. The extraction was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. While Thorne's soldiers created a diversion at the front of the hospital, a team prepped a reinforced ambulance at the rear loading dock. Alara, working with 2 combat medics, packaged Captain Vance for transport. She jury-rigged a battery-powered ventilator and a portable infusion pump, her hands a blur as she transferred his life support from the wall to the gurney. Dr. Finch, confined to his office under the watchful eye of a stony-faced soldier, heard the commotion. He peeked through his blinds and saw them loading the patient into the ambulance. He saw Alara directing the medics, her face set with grim determination. She was getting away. She was going to save him. And when she did, the truth of Finch's own failure and his betrayal would be unavoidable. He felt a surge of pure, desperate panic. The ambulance, part of a 3-vehicle convoy, sped away from the hospital and into the night, its sirens silent. They were a ghost, melting into the city's traffic. Alara rode in the back with Vance and another medic, her eyes glued to the portable monitors. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, just as she had feared. His body was fighting a war on a cellular level, and he was losing. "He's going into DIC," she said, her voice tight. Disseminated intravascular coagulation. His blood was beginning to form tiny clots throughout his body, while simultaneously losing its ability to clot where needed. It was a catastrophic complication. "He's going to start bleeding out internally." General Thorne's voice crackled over the convoy's encrypted comms. "How much time, Alara?" "Not enough," she replied grimly. "Get us to that cabin, fast." An hour later, they were deep in the forested mountains north of the city. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a muddy, rutted track. The ambulance finally pulled up to a secluded, modern-looking cabin nestled among towering pines. It was a place Alara knew well. It was her cabin. The place she had bought with her combat pay and had used to piece herself back together after she left the service. It was her sanctuary, and now it was a battlefield. They rushed Vance inside. The cabin was Spartan, but well-equipped. Alara had installed a heavy-duty generator and a surprising amount of medical-grade wiring. As Thorne's team set up a tactical perimeter, Alara and the medics turned the main living area into a makeshift ICU. But their pursuers were relentless. Finch's information had been precise. A satellite phone call from the captured assassin's handler had pinpointed the convoy's route. Now, a new team was closing in. Not assassins this time. Mercenaries. A dozen of them, heavily armed and equipped with night vision. The first shot came without warning. A high-velocity round punched through a window and slammed into the wall just above Alara's head, showering her with plaster dust. "Contact!" a soldier outside screamed. The night erupted in a storm of automatic gunfire. The siege had begun. Thorne's small team of 6 soldiers was badly outnumbered. They took cover behind trees and the armored vehicles, returning fire, but the mercenaries were advancing steadily, using the darkness and terrain to their advantage. Inside the cabin, Alara ignored the chaos. She had a patient to save. The gunfire was just background noise, a familiar soundtrack to her work. But then, a stray bullet tore through the wall and shattered the infusion pump controlling Vance's critical medication. The machine let out a piercing alarm and died. "I've lost the drip!" the medic beside her yelled over the din. Alara didn't panic. She grabbed a new bag of medication and a standard tubing kit. "I'm going to have to run it wide open and manually regulate the flow. Call out his blood pressure every 30 seconds. She was now the machine, her fingers on the roller clamp, making minute adjustments based on the medic's callouts, keeping the captain alive by touch and instinct. The firefight outside intensified. 2 of Thorne's men were hit. The perimeter was shrinking. The mercenaries were at the edge of the clearing, preparing for a final assault on the cabin itself. General Thorne, his face grim, retreated into the cabin, firing his sidearm through the doorway. "They're flanking us! We're about to be overrun!" Suddenly, from the bed, a voice, raspy and weak. "Give me a weapon." Alara turned. Captain Cole Vance was awake. His eyes were open, bleary but lucid. The fever had broken. Her treatment was working. He was still weak, but the warrior inside him was clawing its way back. "You're in no condition to fight," Alara said firmly. "And you're in no condition to be a bullet shield," he countered, trying to sit up. "My fight. My responsibility." Thorne tossed a spare pistol onto the bed. "Welcome back, Captain." The front door of the cabin splintered under a barrage of bullets. The mercenaries were making their final push. Thorne and his remaining 2 soldiers laid down suppressing fire, but it wasn't enough. Alara made a decision. She grabbed a defibrillator from her stash of medical gear. "Cover me!" she yelled. She crawled to a side window that was taking heavy fire. She waited for a lull in the shooting, then smashed the window with a chair. In the next moment of silence, she heard the mercenaries communicating just outside. She charged the defibrillator to its maximum setting, 360 joules. "Clear," she muttered to herself. She reached out through the broken window and pressed the charged paddles against the metal frame of the cabin's external generator, which was right below. The entire metal siding of the cabin, slick with rain, became a conductor. The mercenary who was leaning against the wall, preparing to breach, let out a horrific, convulsive scream as thousands of volts coursed through his body. He collapsed, smoking. The unexpected tactic threw the attackers into confusion. It bought them a few precious seconds. In that moment, Captain Vance, propped up on one elbow in bed, raised his pistol. He was a specter in the flickering lights, but his aim was steady. A mercenary tried to rush the front door. Pop, pop. 2 shots from Vance's silenced pistol, perfectly placed. The man dropped. The fight became a desperate, close-quarters struggle. Alara and Vance were a strange, formidable team. He, the wounded soldier, picking off targets with lethal precision. She, the medic-turned-warrior, using her knowledge and environment as a weapon, creating diversions, treating the wounded soldiers, and keeping Vance stable, all while the world exploded around them. She grabbed the sidearm from a fallen soldier, her grip expert and familiar. She moved to cover a blind spot, firing 2 shots into the darkness, silencing an approaching threat. The image was surreal. A woman in blood-spattered scrubs, wielding a pistol with the calm proficiency of a seasoned operator. But they were still outnumbered. The enemy was closing in. It was a matter of seconds before they were overwhelmed. And then, just as the last of Thorne's men ran out of ammunition, the sound returned. Whoomp, 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 louder and angrier than before. 4 Black Hawk helicopters roared over the ridge, their searchlights cutting through the night. Heavy machine guns mounted on their sides opened up, tearing the forest apart with terrifying force. The mercenaries, caught in the open, were cut down in a hail of gunfire. Reinforcements poured from the helicopters. The siege was broken. The battle was over. In the sudden ringing silence, Alara stood in the center of the wrecked cabin, her pistol still held at the ready. Captain Vance slumped back against his pillows, exhausted but alive. General Thorne leaned against a wall, a bloody graze on his arm, a look of profound relief on his face. They had held. They had won. The final act did not take place in the blood-soaked cabin, but back in the sterile, media-filled lobby of Metropolitan General the next morning. Dr. Alistair Finch, having been assured by his handler that the situation was resolved, had called a press conference. He stood at a podium, his face a mask of solemn gravity, ready to cement his legacy. "Last night," he began, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "this hospital was targeted by a disturbed and violent former employee, Alara Vance. In a fit of delusion, she kidnapped a patient and, with the help of accomplices, transported him to an unknown location, endangering his life and the lives of my staff." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. "Thanks to the swift action of my team," Finch continued, puffing out his chest, "we were able to manage the crisis here, but I'm afraid the patient's status is currently unknown. This rogue nurse, a woman with a documented history of instability, is responsible for this tragedy." He was cut off by the sound of the main entrance doors sliding open. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. General Marcus Thorne entered, flanked by 4 armed military police officers. Behind him walked Captain Cole Vance, weak and leaning on a cane, but very much alive and wearing his decorated army uniform. And beside the captain, walking tall and straight, was Alara Vance. She was no longer in scrubs, but in a crisp military flight suit, the same one she had worn when Thorne had pinned a medal on her. The long sleeves were gone. The jagged scar on her forearm was visible for all to see. Not a mark of shame, but a badge of honor. They walked to the front of the room, parting the sea of stunned reporters. Finch stared, his mouth agape, his carefully constructed lies turning to ash in his mouth. "That is an interesting version of events, Doctor," General Thorne said, his voice amplified by the microphones on the podium. "But I'm afraid it's not the truth." He held up a small digital audio recorder. "What you are about to hear is a recording of a phone call made by Dr. Finch last night to a known associate of an international arms trafficking syndicate." He pressed play. Finch's panicked, whispering voice filled the silent lobby. "There's a patient here. Military. High value. There's a woman. A nurse. If you wanted to get to him, you'd have to go through her." A collective gasp went through the room. Finch's face went from pale to ghostly white. He looked around wildly, like a cornered rat. That's a fake. It's doctored. She's a criminal. Dr. Finch," Thorne interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. "You committed treason. You sold out a decorated American officer and the woman who saved his life. For what? To cover up your own medical malpractice and staggering ego? He nodded to the military police. Alistair Finch, you are under arrest on charges of conspiracy and treason against the United States of America. The officers moved in. Finch completely unraveled. The arrogant, powerful surgeon vanished, replaced by a pathetic, weeping man. No! It's a lie! A misunderstanding! He shrieked as they cuffed him. She's the one! She's the monster! He was dragged away, still screaming, his downfall total and absolute. The lobby was in an uproar. Thorne stepped back to the podium. He waited for silence. Let me be clear about who the hero is here, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. He turned to Alara. This is Flight Nurse Alara Vance. She is a decorated veteran of 3 combat tours. She is the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for extreme gallantry under fire, an honor she was too humble to ever claim publicly. She is an expert in unconventional warfare medicine and one of the finest combat medics I have ever served with. He looked out at the crowd, at the staff of the hospital who had shunned her. Last night, she single-handedly diagnosed a weaponized nerve agent that every other doctor missed. She defied an incompetent order that would have resulted in Captain Vance's death. She saved his life, not once, but 3 times, while under direct enemy fire. She is not unstable. She is not a criminal. She is a hero, an American hero. A single person began to clap. It was Maya, tears streaming down her face. Then Nurse Helen joined in, her applause loud and firm. Then another nurse, a doctor, a security guard. Within seconds, the entire lobby was filled with a thunderous ovation. The scorn and ridicule were washed away in a tidal wave of respect and gratitude. Alara stood tall, a faint, sad smile on her lips, as she finally allowed herself to accept their praise. Later, after the chaos had subsided, Thorne, Alara, and Captain Vance stood in a quiet corner of the lobby. Your license will be reinstated by noon, Thorne told her. Every official record of your firing will be expunged. Dr. Finch's career is over. His life as he knows it is over. Thank you, General, she said quietly. Don't thank me, he said. I'm the one who should be thanking you. He paused, his expression serious. I have a proposition for you, Alara. We're putting together a new unit, a rapid response team for situations just like this. A small, elite group of medics and operators who can deploy anywhere in the world within 3 hours. It needs a commander, someone who knows the medicine and the battlefield, someone who can think on their feet and isn't afraid to break the rules to save a life. He looked her straight in the eye. I'm offering you a commission. Major Alara Vance. Come build this unit with me. No more hiding. No more being small. It's time to come home. Alara looked at Thorne, the man who had seen her at her best and her worst. She looked at Captain Vance, who was watching her with an expression of profound admiration and gratitude. She thought of the years she had spent in the shadows, trying to outrun her own identity, her own strength. The hiding was over. Yes, sir, she said, her voice clear and strong. I accept. A wide smile broke across Thorne's face. Welcome back, Major. Alara took one last look around the emergency room. She saw the suture trays, the supply closets, the floor she used to stare at. It was a lifetime ago. She turned her back on it all, on the ghost of the timid woman she had pretended to be. She walked out of the automatic doors, not into the cold rain of defeat, but into the bright sunshine of a new day. Captain Vance was at her side, his presence a steady, reassuring warmth. Together, they walked toward the waiting black car, toward a future where she would never have to be small again. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story teaches us that true strength isn't about the title you hold or the authority you wield, but about your character and the courage to do what is right, even when you're standing alone. It shows that you should never judge a book by its cover, because the quietest people often carry the greatest strength. Doing the right thing, even when it's hard, always pays off in the end. What would you have done if you were in Alara's position? Would you have defied a direct order from your boss to save someone's life? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.